I'd like to introduce Mark Baird from Siskiyou County, and Mark has been spearheading this movement. He's the go-to guy. Every time we have a question, Mark's phone rings. So, Mark, come on up here.
Thank you for having me and for allowing me to speak. You know why we're here today. We're here to ask you whether or not, number one, you're happy with the way the state of California is being run. And if not, would you like to do something about it? Yeah. Contrary to popular opinion, and I know in the newspaper the other day they wrote an article, it was a nice article, but they said that this was more of a pep rally. And I disagree with that, because I'm going to ask you to do something about this when we finish with this program. This isn't a pep rally. This is an action item. This train has been on the same track in California for 50 years, and the line is down. We have skyrocketing debt, we have out-of-control government, we have laws that don't do us any good and don't make our lives easier. In fact, 800 laws were passed in California in the last legislative session. And I can't think of a single one that didn't make your life more difficult, more expensive, and more onerous. I can't think of a single law that made your lives better. And that's what we're here to change. Now, the way to change that is by forming a state which protects the individual, protects our right to property, has a constitutional framework that's immutable. And what we want to do with the state of Jefferson, we want to avoid the mistakes that California has made. One of the biggest mistakes California has made, in my opinion, is since 1849, the Constitution's been amended 521 times. Wow. 521 times in 163 years. That's how easy it is to amend the California Constitution to embrace the cause of the day, if you will. Judge Posner from the Seventh Circuit made a very interesting statement at the conclusion of a decision which he lost. And he said, "It is capable for evil to enter the legal system when jurists embrace the cause of the day." And that's what we've done in California. Our Constitution changes with the whim of the cause of the day. Whether that's environmentalism, energy, compliance, clean air, whatever. We change the Constitution every time someone wants to change a law. And that makes it more difficult for someone with common sense or reason or a different point of view to change it back the way it was. In other words, once you ring that bell, you can't unring it. So what we're suggesting is the formation of a new state. Now this is an Article 4, Section 3 of the United States Constitution. It's referred to as a state split. It's been done 4 times in our history. Massachusetts was a part of Maine, Vermont was a part of New York, Tennessee was a part of Virginia, and I believe, I can't remember now, I think it was Kentucky was part of Virginia. So 4 times. It's legal, it's ethical, it's moral, there's precedent for it, it's been done before. It's a very simple paragraph legally in order to do this. Nor shall any state be formed from the territory within one state or the combination of 2 states unless the legislatures of the states involved agree and Congress agrees. So what we need to do is we need to form a basis of common goal. We need to form a consensus. We need to get enough governmental entities or political entities or public entities to agree that they want to join this effort. And once we've achieved that through the declaration process, that's the process we chose to use, once we've achieved enough of these declarations to form a viable state, then we intend to take the declarations to Sacramento. Now, when we have these declarations passed, mind you, the boards of supervisors are not required to take any action. They're simply affirming what the people are asking them to do, and that is to separate from California and form the state of Jefferson. So once we take the declaration to Sacramento, then we have the Legislative Council draw up a piece of legislation. The counties would be involved with the above legal descriptions wish to withdraw from the state of California. It's as simple as that. These declarations are not complex. They only need to be 2 sentences long. California is ungovernable in its present form, and we want to start over by forming a new state. Any language in the middle is simply an affirmation of the unique problems for Butte County or Del Norte County or Siskiyou County. In other words, the logic and the reasons why you want your supervisors to affirm this declaration. Now, mind you, you're not asking permission for anything. You're asking for an affirmation of what you know needs to be done. And this, as opposed to a resolution, causes no action. A county resolution, they would have to direct county agencies to do things, it would cost money, and it would take time away from other duties. This does not. It's simply a declaration of the desire to withdraw and petition the state. Now, the language is very interesting. We've come up with that language through a long process with constitutional attorneys for one reason. Because there are three legs to a federal assault on any law. One leg is you have to ask for something. We're asking for a new state because we have no representation in the state where we live. The second leg of that stool is there has to be some harm. In other words, we ask the state for something and they say no. So if the state says yes, we get our own state, provided Congress agrees. If the state says no, there's been harm. Now, the third element to any federal case is very, very important. There has to be a remedy. In other words, if the court can't help you with what you've been refused, then they dismiss the case. But in this case, what is the remedy for our harm? More representation. What is it we want? More representation. Now, why do I say lack of representation? Because in California, we're number 50 out of 50 for lack of representation. Every state senator represents 950,000 people. If each state senator got one call from every constituent once a year, he'd have to answer the phone 3,960 something times a day, and he'd be able to spend exactly 8 seconds with each caller. As you can see, that's not very effective representation. Now in New Hampshire, as opposed to California, each representative has 3,000 constituents. Not 300,000, not 30,000, 3,000. You know how much a political campaign costs in New Hampshire? It's about $1,000. The guy, he files and he fills his car with gas and he goes and he knocks on 3,000 doors, and he can do it. And do you know why people like that? Because if this guy does something wrong, they're going to see him in Walmart the next day. And it's very easy to let him know that he did something that they don't approve of. We're here in California. If any one of you wanted to call your state senator, I doubt very seriously you'd get him on the phone the first day, maybe not even the first week. That's something we have to change, because what that causes is a lack of empathy. It's a lack of empathy for your life. You have no power to direct events that affect your life. The northern third of California has 4 representatives, depending upon how you count the territory. The city of Los Angeles has about 35. So as you can see, we are literally and figuratively powerless to affect any change that impacts our lives directly. Now, another result of lack of representation is, for example, the fire tax. Now, I know a lot of people like to seize on this as oh gosh, we're a one-issue deal, but this is simply representative of a great many things. Carve, the bathroom law, and I could go on and on. But the fire tax is a good one because it's very illustrative of how things work in California. The fire tax was largely passed by urban legislators whose constituents don't pay the tax. Can you imagine how easy it is to create revenue generators when you know for a fact there's going to be absolutely no political fallout from the people who elected you? And that's why we have the fire tax, because our representation, no matter how bad they wanted to defeat that, we're simply powerless to do anything about it. Now, I'm not saying our representatives are bad people. They're not. They're good men and they're swinging. Your supervisors, they're good people and they're out there swinging for you. But they need to know what you want. They are your representatives, and you need to instruct them as to how you wish them to behave. And that's the important component in this. So now, how do we do this? We get our declarations, we go and we have our legislation introduced, and hopefully that's when the education process begins. So what we need to do is we need to have town hall meetings in Los Angeles, we need to have town hall meetings in Fresno and Kern County and all over the place. And what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to communicate with all of the people you know in other areas and explain to them why we need their help to make this happen. And I'm also going to ask you to contact one of your supervisors every single day, or every other day, or if you don't have time, every third day. But I'm going to ask you to do something to make this happen if this is what you want to happen, because the result of inaction is nothing. And a great many things are possible with our new state, a great many things. And none of these things are possible unless we achieve this. So we're going to have to let Sacramento know in no uncertain terms how it is we want our elected officials to behave, and we're not going to take no for an answer. And that's the key to this whole thing. Now, why do we need to do this? First of all, California used to have a federal model of government. The federal model of government meant that every county had a state senator. And I think there was a provision in the Constitution that very small counties, like I think Sierra County, because they only have 3,000 people, they could be lumped in with another county. No more than 3 counties, and they had to touch one another. They had to be contiguous. And each one of those counties had their own senator. Well, in 1965, the Warren Court decided to disobey the Constitution, ignore the will of the people, and they decided on a case called Sims versus Reynolds. Sims versus Reynolds essentially said that votes cannot represent acres and trees. One vote has to represent one person. And the dissenting justice in that case predicted exactly what's happening now. He said that assemblies would be rubber stamps for one another, and that it wouldn't be long before 5 or 6 urban centers in the United States would control all politics, because that's where most of the votes are. So what we have also in the dissent was a justice who recognized that perhaps votes do not represent rocks and trees, but they do represent communities and what communities need. And communities are geographically dependent. They're dependent on water and forests, and they're dependent on farming and ranching or industry or whatever that community uses to make a living. But our communities now, because of one man, one vote, have become absolutely irrelevant in the state of California. So also, when we recognize this, then we can go a step further. The last 2 governors of California have never been to my county. They don't even know where it is. In fact, a Fox News reporter called me on the phone. He wanted to come up and interview. I said, sure. He had to Google Siskiyou County because he didn't know what road to take to get there. This guy lives in Sacramento. He's only 5 hours away. So if you want to look at it this way, California is nothing but a huge public service corporation. And what we have here is we have a division called Northern California. And that division is poorly managed. It loses money decade after decade. It's lost money for 50 or 60 years. In fact, Northern California has lost money ever since Sims versus Reynolds was decided, because we lost our representation at that point. In 1950, California had $5 billion in debt. By 1970, it was 13% of GDP, and now it's 18 or 19% of our gross domestic product for the entire state is debt. It's around $500 billion. That was the result of Sims versus Reynolds. No balance, no check on power. So, once again, we have an unused division called Northern California, and we're constantly losing money. Well, if you were in business, what would you do? You'd have 2 choices. Number 1, sell the loser or shut it down. Number 2 is replace management and put management in there that will manage that division correctly and get it to be profitable again. Now, that's not going to happen because most of the stockholders like the present management. They're the people in the city with all the votes. So what we're asking for is a corporate spin-off. If you can't run your division, if you don't want to go to the building, if you've never even been inside the building, why not let local talent have a chance to turn this division around? And that's what we're asking for. We're asking for a state where counties have the lion's share of the power. We're asking for a state with a framework that protects the individual, protects his right to property, and protects his ability to make a living for himself and his children. I don't know about you all. How many here have had kids that moved away because they couldn't make a living here? Well, I see quite a few hands going up. My son left. He's never coming back because he said he couldn't make a living in Siskiyou County. And guess what? He's right. So what I would like to do is create a state where my son and his children can come and live and afford to raise their family and have a decent life. We have a beautiful place here, and it belongs to us. But if we don't do something about this, none of this is going to matter, and we might as well just go along with whatever is done to us. Okay, so now what's the next step here? What can we do to make this happen? Well, we can do exactly what your committee's done in Butte County. They formed a committee of responsible people who are following through, and they're going to get a declaration passed by the Board of Supervisors here, even if they have to elect new members to that board. And that's what we're going to do in all of the counties that are interested. I'm not here to tell you how to live. I'm here to ask you whether you're tired of the way you're living now and whether you'd like to do something about that. Now, what are the arguments against this? typically the argument we get most commonly, and this is from established politicians, I agree with everything you say. In fact, we have 2 supervisors here who have said this to me, and I'm not going to name them. I agree with everything you say. You're absolutely right. The state is onerous. It can't be governed. Something needs to be done about it. But I can't vote for that because it's too hard. It's too hard. I hope that's not the new standard for American behavior. Because, you know, it comes to mind Jimmy Doolittle standing on the deck of an aircraft carrier in 1941, and he's going to take off with 25 guys and fly to Tokyo, and he knows he doesn't have enough gas to get back. And he's going to drop the first bombs on the Japanese after Pearl Harbor. I'm certainly glad he didn't say to himself, gosh, this is too hard. I think I'm going to go below deck and have a sandwich. George Washington sitting at the table across the Delaware from Trenton, New Jersey, and he's writing at his desk, and his buddy Dr. Warren's talking to him, and he's furiously writing on these scraps of paper. And Warren grabs one and he says, what are you doing? He's tearing these papers into little bits and he's writing on it. And he's writing the words, liberty or death. That was the password for the attack on Christmas Day on the Hessians in Trenton, New Jersey. And these guys walked 9 miles with no shoes. In fact, you could follow their trail by the blood left in the snow because they had rags wrapped around their shoes. They had to cross the river filled with ice, fight, and then instead of going back, they swung around the British to Princeton and fought again. I'm certainly glad they didn't say, you know, gosh, it's a little bit hard. I think we should just stay in camp for the next couple of weeks. John Kennedy said in 1969, I remember I was a little kid, not that little, but he said, we're going to send a man to the moon in this decade, and not because it's easy, but because it's hard. So I think the argument that this is too hard is irrelevant to us as Americans. Certainly hard things used to be a challenge to us that we accepted readily. In fact, we made a country based on that principle. The other argument that we typically get is, what are we going to do without the money? And this comes from conservative politicians who say, I'm a conservative, but I cannot fathom a government in which I don't have my hand out to a progressive agenda. What are we going to do without the welfare money? My answer to that is, we're going to do just fine.
Put them to work.
Because we're going to figure it out. And personally, if I lived in a free state, I could live with a couple of potholes in a county government that had used equipment. I've never had new equipment in my life. I think a free state is important because it would allow us to develop a constitutional framework that has a friendly business environment, a friendly regulatory environment. We don't need 570 state agencies to run a small rural state. We need to amend some of the contracts and some of the ways that we do business, but we're certainly smart enough to do that. There is enough money to form a viable state. We would not be the smallest state, we would not be the least populous state. I believe Mike's going to address that, so I won't go any further into that. So we have the opportunity to do that. What are the reasons we really want to leave? I know Robert in the back, he wrote me a letter that said a trucking company in Reading is going to lose $12 million over CARB in 1 year. They're going to lose 21 rigs, 21 jobs, and have to overhaul everything they have. I've got a $4,000 tractor, 1978 International, 1466 for all you guys at farm. It's a big, nice tractor for 1978, runs like a watch, cost me $4 grand. I'm going to have to put a $20,000 exhaust filter on that tractor in a county that had 0 poor air quality days last year. So we have no air quality issues in the state of California. The Siskiyou Pellet Mill had to stop making finishing pellets for cattle because the the State Air Resources Board said they were making too much dust. This pellet mill's in the middle of nowhere, for gosh sakes. The cows make more dust walking past the mill than the mill does making the pellets. Yet we're forced to comply with air quality standards for cities that are 500 and 600 and 700 miles away, that are initiated by politicians who do not know how we live, do not know what it takes for us to conduct our lives, don't know how much it costs, have never been to our area, and quite frankly have no empathy for that because they think it's a good idea. And if we address the debt and some of these other issues, and I could go on for hours, but I know we have other speakers, so I won't. But I want to thank you for allowing us to come here. I'd like to thank you for your attention and for considering this possibility. And we can make this a reality, but it's up to you to do it. It's up to us to make this happen. We are the people mentioned in the Constitution of the United States. Government serves at the will of the people. They derive all of their just power from the people. Government has one purpose, and one purpose only, to defend the rights of the individual according to the Constitution. And remember, we don't have freedoms. We traded some of those freedoms to government in order to form a contract where they will protect the liberties that we hold most dear. Freedom of speech, our rights to property, the rights of the individual, the right to assemble. We traded some of the freedom we have in order to guarantee those liberties. Those liberties are inalienable rights. You were born with them. You don't have to ask anybody for them, and you don't have to ask anybody's permission to use them. Those rights are quantified and guaranteed in the Constitution of the United States. But if you don't stand up and demand that guarantee be honored, then it's not a guarantee at all. Thank you very much.
2 days ago,
While you're doing that, I'll get you.
a billionaire down in Silicon Valley was going to finance a referendum in order to create 6 states here in California. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that, and anybody else up there on the board.
Why don't we let Mark take that one, because I know he's ready. Oh, Terry, okay, go ahead. Yeah.
That's Tim Draper, and he actually called me on Christmas Eve. We had a little discussion about some of this. Part of his plan could make some sense in a roundabout sort of way, but as it was explained, the idea of voting on states isn't even constitutional, number one. I find Tim to be a fine man, and I think his heart's in the right place. I think he eventually is going to be an ally. When we chatted, I also explained to him about Reynolds versus Sims, and he didn't know about that. So the way he broke it up, for example, the state that would be just below the state of Jefferson includes Sierra, it includes Nevada, it includes Yuba, Sutter, etc. A lot of counties that would be with us in the state of Jefferson. And there were 2 problems with that. One is they were included with Sacramento County, and when you're included in with Sacramento County, because of one man, one vote, and they have all the population, guess who's going to have all the assemblymen and the senators? So what happens to those counties? They get what? No representation again. So, not knowing that, he basically had made the statement that he had wished he had talked to Mark or one of us first. And we'll be having discussions with him, but that's as far as I'm going to go with that one, because pretty much it's already, the horse is out of the barn on that, and so we'll just wait and see. But I think the guy's heart's in the right place, and I think his intentions were good, and he's going to get a little more information on just exactly how it really does work constitutionally.
Sir, you mentioned how the process at the state level. Might you mention what happens at the federal level? And the other part of my question is, looking at the map of the counties, I would say at least 60% of the land in there is controlled by the Forest Service, BLM, or the National Park Service. So what effect would this have on the management of those public lands?
That's a good question. First of all, the process under Article 4, Section 3 legally is very simple. It calls for a majority of the state legislature must approve the split. The majority of the federal legislature, Congress and Senate, must approve the split. The president and the governor are not mentioned in the Constitution. We take that to mean it's not required to get their signature. We simply need a simple majority in both houses of the state and the federal government. Now, that's not an easy task, but it is an education. It's a task that we need to accomplish. We need to educate the people in Southern California as to why they can help us with this, and it would be a win for them and a win for us. How would it be a win for them? Because they have problems, as Terry said, that we can't even understand. They have large infrastructure problems, large water problems, gang problems, crime problems, urban problems. Those problems are so diametrically opposed to our way of life, we're no help to them. We can't help them. We don't have any input that's valid for their problems. So they would be free to concentrate their political power and their money to solve problems we don't understand and can't help them with. We, on the other hand, know we would win. because we would create a state framework with a regulatory environment and a business environment that would allow us to grow, and a constitutional framework that would enable the individual to make a living for himself and his family and to protect his property. So that would be a win-win for California. Now, as far as federal territory within the state of Jefferson, most of the counties in Northern California are blessed with the problem that the state and the feds control a great deal of property within the county. Siskiyou County, for example, it's something like 65%. So we have two problems here. Number one, we have a state that fails to abide by the laws that it writes for itself. For example, the State Fish and Game Commission owns almost 800 properties in the state of California, and although the state is not required to pay property taxes on property the state owns, they did agree when they began to purchase these properties after the Constitution was signed in 1872, they did agree to pay a sum of money called PILT, Payment in Lieu of Taxes. Yet the Fish and Game has failed to pay their taxes for over 10 years to the counties of Northern California for the properties that they control. That's a tremendous deficit to county government because they rely on that money, and property taxes by and large remain in the county where they're collected. So what we could do as a state, number one, under the Equal Footing Act and the Enabling Act, it is possible for us to regain control, not of national forest land because that's land held in trust, but we could possibly regain a good deal of BLM land because that is, quote, public land. And under the Enabling Act and the Equal Footing Act, there's plenty of precedents. Alaska was the last in 1959. They regained control of 3.1 million acres of BLM land. They then took that land and they placed it back in beneficial use. In other words, they either sold it or they rented it out so they could regain property tax revenues from those lands. Now, under the Enabling Acts, all states that are created are supposed to have equal footing with other states. In other words, equal chance at success. So there is precedent that we may be able to regain control of some BLM land and at least place them back into beneficial uses, which would put them back on the property tax rolls. And that would be one way counties could make more revenue. And by the way, in the state we imagine, counties would have the lion's share of the profit, or the power, I'm sorry. So it would be county governments that decide how you're going to live in your county. And the state would do what states do best, which is act as a liaison with the federal government, administer federal programs, liaise between counties when they couldn't make up their minds about things, and administer state programs between the counties. And pretty much that's it. States should stay out of the business of the people. People govern from the bottom up. That's the way our Constitution was intended. So those are ways that we could regain revenue and also place our state on an equal footing with other states almost immediately. Does that answer your question?
I'm Mike Baird from Paradise School Board, and because I'm an educator, what I'm interested in is we look around, we're not young here, but you set up in Siskiyou County, you got a lot more.
I beg your pardon?
You're still young.
I might be 62, but I don't look a day over 61.
Not much. But what I want to know is what are the plans to go ahead and reach out? Are there plans to go to, say, Butte College, Siskiyou, Shasta, on the college campuses to get those younger people? Because this is an educational thing. That's what we're here for tonight, is for education. Are there plans to do that with those other students to go for?
I'm going to share this one with Kayla because she's still in school and she knows a lot more about it than I do. But one thing I'd like to say about California's education process before I hand the microphone over, we spend more per student than any other state, and yet our test scores are down around 48, 2 from the bottom. So we're doing something wrong with that. And I imagine a state where we have a charter school or a voucher system where we can be more effective with our education dollars. And now I'm going to hand the rest of that off to Caleb.
The good and the bad thing is that a lot of young people use the internet excessively, quite excessively sometimes. And so we actually have, Robert, how many is it? 6, 7, 8,000 people on our Facebook pages?
I think we just topped over 8,000 last week.
We just topped over 8,000 young people on our Facebook pages. So we are reaching the young people. That's the quickest and fastest way to get a hold of them. We also do have, again, I'm in school. I'm actually at an online grad school right now. My graduate thesis is on the state of Jefferson and statehood and how that all works. And I have 15 other military students in my class, and every single one of them said, "That's awesome." So every time you bring this up to students, I know Richard Ochoa is up at Shasta College, and he is posting flyers all around campus and talking to all the other students up there. And I don't think he's run into any resistance on the state of Jefferson either. So a lot of times it's just young people going out and just talking about the state of Jefferson, talking about the problems that are occurring, because young people really are involved. We do know that there is a lot of problems with the state. There's a lot of problems with the federal government as well. And we're looking around going, I know with my father, he said, get a college education because then you'll get a good job. And I kind of snicker at that now. But it used to be the truth that if you got an education, if you were a hard worker, you would have a job. So young people today are going, okay, wait a minute. That's not always the truth. So what happened here and how do we fix it? So your young people are involved despite Waters' World on O'Reilly.
Absolutely able to split the state. And the second thing that I have to say is that, you know, there's been a lot of talk about Governor Jerry Brown tonight, and in the 1970s, that guy made so many promises to the people who were state employees of the state of California that there are state employees now who are retired that may be getting 80% of the highest salary that they ever made for a longer time than they actually worked. And so how are we going to pay those people if we split this state?
Well, I'm really glad you asked me that, sort of. Anyway, first water rights, and I am somewhat qualified to address that. I'm the president of one water rights group in Siskiyou County, and I was a vice president of the Siskiyou Water Users Association until last year. And we've been in a protracted fight, not so much for water rights, but for the use of the water we have a right to. So what I have to say first is there are a couple of problems with this. Number one, water rights are water rights. And it would be dishonorable and we would lack integrity to attack the water rights that are in place right now. We just can't do that. It wouldn't be the right thing to do. But what we can do is we can hold if we have our own state, and mind you, here's the problem. If we have our own state, a great many things are possible, none of which are possible if we fail to gain statehood. So with our own state, we can, for example, the water rights in the Central Valley were given up by California to the feds a long time ago to form the Central Valley Project. And so what we can do is we can hold our hand out to the feds as the state of Jefferson, and we can demand that they follow their own rules. Now what we found in Siskiyou County is 99% of the time that stopped them cold because they don't even know what their own rules are. For example, TMDL, which is part of federal EPA and state EPA and State Water Resources Control Board. They come to your river and they say, gosh, there's too much dirt in your river. And so we asked them, well, how much dirt is allowed? Well, we don't know. Well, how much dirt was here 100 years ago? Well, we don't know that either. So how do you know there's too much dirt now? Well, we made up a set of data. And with the data we made up, we came up with a model. And we're going to use this model to show you what your river might just possibly be capable of achieving in a perfect world, and you're going to adhere to that. And so we asked them one question. Who's your data quality assessment officer? And under the Data Quality Act, you have to have one. They didn't even know what that was. And then we asked them, are you in compliance with the Regulatory Flexibility Act? They didn't know what that was either. Well, in short, that was the end of the meeting, and they left, and that was a year and a half ago, and they haven't been back. So what we can do as a state, if we have a state, and part of our problem is that California doesn't insist that the federal government follow the law. They let the federal government do pretty much whatever they want to. NOAA Fisheries and all of those agencies, they run around Northern California with armed agents Mirandizing hardworking private citizens because they're complaining about a fish in a jurisdiction they don't even control. But California does not provide the backbone that your county government needs to demand that the federal government follow the law. They do not demand that the federal government coordinate. Coordination is a federal statute. The feds are bound by law to follow the coordination statutes. Why don't they do it? Because the state doesn't insist that they do it, and counties, as an arm of the state, are not in a position to make that demand themselves. They can try, but it's very difficult and very complex, and quite often they fail because the procedure is extremely complex. As a state, we can form a regulatory framework where we demand that the federal government follows the law. And 95% of the time, that's the end of the argument because they don't even know what the law is half the time. So, and then the other half of your question, so that would take care of the water rights. And then the other half of your question has to do with public employee pensions. Here's our problem. When you make a promise to a guy that works his whole life and he bases his life upon the promises you made him, you can't break that promise. So at some point, you have to fulfill the oath you made to the individuals involved, and you have to honor that pension. Now, in the state of Jefferson, we're going to have to do things different because we can't afford a California-style bureaucracy, and we don't want one. So what we will have to do is come up with some kind of cutoff where people who are vested, we honor the contract. There's no other thing to do that's honorable or shows any integrity on our part. And so what we can do is come up with some kind of cutoff point, and from that point on, we move from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan. No one can guarantee an 8% retirement forever. The taxpayers can't shoulder that burden. But what we can do is we can define a contribution that's fair and equitable to the employee. It's much like a 401k that the employer contributes to. And from that point on, that's how we do it. And then as time goes by and those liabilities do not go unfunded, our state will become more and more fiscally sound as time goes by, as opposed to California that has something near to $900 billion. And for those of you that aren't really math friendly, that's 900,000 million dollars. We're in the hole on unfunded liabilities. And $420 billion, that's $420,000 million, we're in the hole, and that's just the debt anybody can find out about on the internet. We must cure that debt, and we have to move toward a defined contribution plan and away from a defined benefit plan.
We can ship them all south.
Bill, we've got time for probably 3 more quick questions because we want to stay on schedule here.
It seems everyone here is very like-minded. My question would be, who would be in opposition to the state of Jefferson and why?
The people that are primarily in opposition to this are in opposition to anything that's not status quo. Look, let's face it, all animals like things that don't change. It's easier to follow a routine. The dog knows when he's supposed to be fed. Heck, when I'm 20 minutes late feeding the horses, they're standing there pawing at the gate saying, where's that moron with the hay? They know what time it is better than I do. Animals hate change, but we must have change if we're going to survive. And in order to survive, we must have our own state where we can define the rules, and the rules have to meet our expectations and meet our needs, our historic, our moral, culture, and so on. We have to be able to form a state with laws that benefit us and representation that does as we wish.
I'd like to hear a little bit about regulations, AB 32, EPA, and the Endangered Species Act, which I think controlled all the jobs that we don't have.
Well, once again, we use the 10th Amendment as a state, and by the way, that's something your county doesn't have the power to do. You have good people in government here, but they only have so much power. They depend upon a state framework in order to give them the regulatory power to tell the feds that you can't act like that when you're in this county. So what we do is use the 10th Amendment to force the EPA to follow their own rules, and they can't do it because they don't even know what their own rules are, and they don't know how to follow them when they do know what they are.
Yeah, I'm Greg Olson. Isn't it true that the state of California has to pay their pensions for their workers? It wouldn't be transferred to the state of Jefferson?
Well, here's the deal, and once again, if we don't do this in a way that's right and in a way that's honorable, that makes us no better than they are, and personally, I don't want anything to do with that. So what we have a certain amount of debt that this state has incurred, and we weren't frozen in ice when it occurred. So we were part of the problem. The reason we have this government is because we were all asleep and we didn't do anything about it when we could have and we should have. Right. This is all our own fault. Remember, we don't get the government we negotiate for, we get the government we allow. Well, we've allowed this, but we can stop it. And what happens is, when we have the committees of separation, the debt is going to be apportioned. If we insist that they work with Sims versus Reynolds, which is what they seem to want to do, we could walk away from the rest of the state with 3% of the debt because we only have 3% of the people. Now, 3% of that debt is manageable now, but if we wait 20 years until it's $5 trillion, it may not be then. That's why we need to act now while the debt is manageable, and we can take that 3% and apportion it out and figure out a way to pay it off. Is it going to be easy? No. I'm not suggesting, as some people in government do, well, the state of Jefferson can't survive because economically it's not viable. That's the wrong question. The question isn't, can we survive? The question is, can we get away from California before the debt Titanic sinks? And that's the question we should be asking. This debt, according to CaliforniaDebtClock.org, is going up at about $4,000 a minute of every hour, of every day, of every week, of every month, of every year. We need to escape that debt and form our own state that's fiscally responsible before we can't manage our portion of it, and before California goes bankrupt, which it inevitably will. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say that I believe that those people who have already retired from the state of California, California would still be required to pay their pension. Those people that are still employed by California who would then become employees of the state of Jefferson, those would be the people that we would have to work with in order to make sure that they're not screwed by the transition.
Okay, yeah, I like the way you put that, and that's a question I get all the time. People ask me, well, if we form the state of Jefferson, what happens to my CalPERS because I'm already retired? Well, the answer is nothing. Nothing happens to your CalPERS. In fact, you'd get a 10% raise because you'd be moving to a state where the taxes are lower. So, and also, when you talk about your Social Security, what happens to your Social Security? Nothing. What happens to your Medicare? Nothing. So the programs that are in place from the federal government and programs that you're already vested in, those programs won't stop. But when we form a state structure, then we're going to need to deal with employee pensions, and we're going to deal with that in a way that's fair to the employee and doesn't break the taxpayer at the same time, and it's going to be more along with what the private sector has, a defined contribution plan and 401ks. That's the way the rest of us have to live. That's only fair. If that is the last question, I'd like to thank you. Wait, we might have one more.
I think that was...
I think we've got one more question down
here. A quick one? This
lady
right here?
This lady here?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, I would just like to know how feasible is it really for our state to vote for us to do this, and then the feds? I just don't see them doing that.
Well,
they have our water. Well, you already addressed that, but is it really feasible that they could actually vote to let us do our state?
I'm an airplane pilot too. That's my day job because, of course, farming pays so much anymore. You can't afford to stay home. And I've been to every crumb hole in the world. I've been to 6 wars for the United States government, and I'm here to tell you that places where people's lives work, they have representation that they can look in the eye. And places where their lives don't work, they have representation that governs from afar with no empathy for the individual. Is this feasible? I'm not a big time waster. If I didn't think we could do it, I am way too busy to be sitting here wasting y'all's time. Is it going to be easy? Absolutely not. Do we have to do it? Yes, it's a matter of survival. So we better make it feasible. And if we do our jobs correctly, if we help people in Southern California understand how this is a win for them and a win for us, and we can educate our legislators, I think it is feasible, and we have a narrow window. Because every day, California feeds us the ammunition we need to be dissatisfied. The potty bill, AB 32, CARB, cap and trade, I could go on for hours. We have plenty of groundwork. We have plenty of basis. We have plenty of reasons to leave. All we need to do is help them understand how they would be ahead in allowing us to go. And that's just a sales job.